Hey everybody, welcome to Smith Stuff. Today we've got the 87 Chevy S-10 here in the shop, and we're going to share with you what we did to replace the fuel pump, some little tips and tricks along the way, things that make it a little easier for you to do it at home or in your own shop. But before I get to that, my son Toby's got a little message he wants to share with you today.
Please everybody like and subscribe and turn all notifications on. Back to you, Dad.
Thanks, Toby. So, as I said, we replaced the fuel pump on this 87 Chevy S-10. It has the 2.5 four-cylinder throttle body injection engine. It runs about 12 pounds of fuel pressure, but there's a few different ways you could put this fuel pump in the vehicle. You could drop the fuel tank down and do it that way. You could take the bed completely off, or you could tilt the bed up as I have done here. And to do that, what I did is I loosened up the bolts that go through the frame and hold the bed down. There's 3 bolts on the S-10. I think there's 4 bolts on the full size. The full size is very similar design to this, so you can follow these steps to do the full size vehicles as well, as full size Chevy trucks as well. So what I did is loosen up those bolts, about 3 or 4 threads. Don't take the bolts all the way out. Leave them in on the right side. And on the left side, take your bolts all the way out. You also need to take these 3 bolts out here at your fuel neck. They're a 7mm socket. If you take those out, and then when you lift the truck bed up, that neck will just fall down. And you kind of have to work it in and line it up when you go back down. Now you can do this yourself, or you can have someone else put blocks of wood or anything in there. I like to put 2 sets of blocks of wood in just for safety concerns in case one flipped out. This roughly is about 4 2x4s, works pretty good because you don't want to tilt it too much, or you could possibly scratch the paint on the right side where the bumper and bed come together, so be careful with that. Another thing you want to disconnect, I'll show you back here towards the back, is some of the wiring. You've got to make sure you disconnect it. Usually you have a ground wire that is held on by, I think it's a 1/2 inch socket bolt there. And you'll take that loose. It's usually bolted to the frame, and then there's usually some electrical connectors. Different trucks are going to vary because people have done all sorts of wiring over the years, I'm sure, but make sure all of that stuff's loose because you don't want to tear any connectors up or wiring when you tilt the bed up. Now some people tilt the bed. I tilted it by just picking it up myself. Some people use like a cherry picker engine hoist and they put it under here, but you got to be careful. You don't want to mess the paint up or put any dents and stuff. You can put rags on there if you need to take the jacket up. But 1 or 2 people could easily pick this bed up, being that it's an S-10. The full-size trucks are a little heavier. And if you got anything in the bed of the truck, it's a good time to get that out. But I'll get to the fuel pump. My son Logan's got the fuel pump that we took out. If he wants to bring it in, I'll get him to. Logan, you over there? Bring that fuel pump in. I think that's Logan. He looks more like Shrek, but anyway, this is the fuel pump that we pulled out, and you can see probably the reason I replaced it. Once I got in there, I saw all this wiring had been patched up, and some of this is frayed really bad. This looks like the original sending unit. Now you can purchase just the pump, or you can purchase this whole assembly. I would always advise to put a whole assembly in there because a lot of times this stuff right here gets really rusted. You start moving it around, it'll start leaking. Then you got your fuel level sensor. Maybe it'll start acting up once you touch it. It's just a good idea to replace this as a whole unit. Now, the problem with this truck, the fuel pump was still good. It was pumping fuel great. But the level sensor didn't seem to be very accurate at times. It would come and go. So we decided just to put, by the looks of it, we decided to put the whole unit in there. An important thing I will stress with you is the ground wire, and there's a ground wire. This is the ground wire. It looks pretty rough, but this is the ground wire that comes off of the sending unit, and it bolts right here on the top of the frame. It's always a good idea to take that bolt out and clean that surface very well, because if you don't have a good ground connection there, you're not going to have good pump operation, and your fuel gauge may not even work correctly. So we cleaned that area right there good with a wire brush. And then you got one connector on this truck, because it's a throttle body, it just has 2 wires. The gray wire is your power feed to the pump. So that's going to be a 12-volt signal coming in. You know, if you turn the switch on, it's going to be there for a few seconds till the relay kicks off. But as you're cranking it, you should have close to 12 volts on the gray wire. On the purple wire, that is the signal back to your cluster for the fuel gauge. So just letting you know the colors here and what they do. There's let's see, 4 hoses here that you need to disconnect. I like to disconnect them at the sender. Usually they have this hose clamps on there. You can get in there pretty easily and disconnect the hoses. Then there's that ring. Let me show you the ring. I'll show you the old one. This is the ring that holds the pump down in the tank. And there's a seal under there as well, so make sure you put the new seal in. But you'd have to take a chisel or screwdriver and catch it on these little tabs and knock it counterclockwise, and that turns it to these open spots here, so you can get past the tabs that are made on to the tank. That releases the pump, and then when you pull that pump out, you just kind of angle it out carefully, and you can work it out of there. It actually come out pretty easy on this truck. I was surprised how easily it did come out. So that's pretty much how you get it out, and then, you know, the installation, you know, is just pretty much the reverse of what we went over. And then well, let me tell you this, a couple tips. I always like to blow off with a air hose, blow this off before I take that pump out, because dirt and grit will build up. And even when I pull the pump all the way out, there's sometimes loose dirt there. I like to take a vacuum and just clean that out really good before I put that new pump in there, just to keep debris out of the tank. And you can actually, once you get to this point where you got everything hooked up and your ground, make sure you got that ground hooked up and this plugged in, you can actually go and start the vehicle and make sure that it runs properly and starts, and that your fuel gauge is operating. That way, if you need to do anything, you still got the bed up and you don't have to pick the bed all the way back up again. And I'm gonna demonstrate how I let the tank down. Let the bed down. And it's just me doing this, so just bear with me here. But I like to remove, these are my safety blocks. They're not really holding, but they're just kind of there for safety. And then I just and I got it on the lift now, so it's up a little higher than it normally sits. But you can just remove a couple blocks at a time, or all of them at one time, and just kind of ease the bed down. It's pretty simple. And then you just go in here and you can line that neck back up with a screwdriver or something. It usually lines up pretty easily. But that's pretty much it, guys. You know, you can do this job in 1 hour if you got the tools and everything, which it's not a lot of tools involved. It's not really no special tools. But just make sure you hook your wiring back up. Make sure you tighten all of your bed bolts back. I like to use a 1/2-inch impact or a 3/8 impact gun to remove those bolts. Some of them can be tricky, especially if it's 4-wheel drive and you got a hitch, because that hitch sometimes can get in the way of getting to those bolts. If it's really hard to get to them bolts, it might be easier for you to drop the tank. But if you can't, especially on a 2-wheel drive, sometimes it's easier just to lift this bed up. Just be careful in not scratching any paint, anything like that. But just wanted to share that with you today. Hope this helps you guys out, and we'll see you next time. Thanks a lot.